Embodied Interaction, Lecture 1, Part 3, the Embodied Alternative. So we've been talking in the previous part about the split between mind and body that was first introduced most clearly by René Descartes, the French philosopher. And what I want to emphasize at this moment is that this split in thinking about ourselves as being two distinct things at the same time, a mind and a body, detached from one another, this way of thinking also permeates all of our society and especially also the whole range of technologies and industries that we have been developing since the Enlightenment, especially going into the industrial age. So what we see is that this split is actually represented also in the different fields of research that you all would be interested in. So on the one hand, you have computers, which is one separate department in the university, computer science, and basically everything around research around computers is focused on this idea of mind. So it's all about information, about understanding, about knowledge, about data, about representation, and so on. So everything, all the talk that surrounds computers is generally focused on everything that has to do with the mind part of the Cartesian split between mind and body. Computers are tools for the mind, you could say. Now, in the industrial design department where I work, we traditionally create all kinds of tools that are for the body, like a stroller, for example, to support your physical body. And there's this split not only in how we theorize human beings, but also how we have organized our technological world. So this means that in everyday life situations, not only at work, not only in dedicated computer activities like being a researcher in a lab or something, but in all of our everyday activities, we now continuously switch between dealing with digital information, a virtual world, which is modeled on this idea of mind being detached from the body. We go into that virtual world as soon as we look into our screens, and then we switch back onto the other world, which is like the world that our feet are located in, the physical world. When I'm saying this, people say, well, I don't experience it as problematic at all. I just do this all day and I have no issues with it. But that's because human beings are tremendously flexible in adapting to whatever we provide them with, right? So if we say this is your world, you now have to live 1.5 meters detached from each other, and you can no longer touch each other, then, well, we say, oh, that's difficult, and we complain a little bit, and we tweet here and there, and we write a column in the newspaper, and then we're just going to do it, right? And we're going to adapt to it, and in 2 months from now, it's going to be like the new normal, right? And the same goes in the way we've become used to using these small devices in our pockets. But that doesn't mean it's the good thing to do, right? It's a different question to think about. What do we actually want? What kind of world do we actually want to live in? Is this here, what you see right now on the screen, is this the world we want to live in? Or can we design a better one? That's a different question. If you ask me, I would say I think there could be more attention to what I called in the first lecture, the situated practices of people. So a person engaged in a task that is both mental and physical, both body, both mind. It's thinking, doing, perceiving, acting, interacting with stuff in the world. And together it forms a coherent, meaningful whole, such as what the chef is experiencing when they're making a very nice, delicate meal for a customer in the kitchen. How can we design something for the chef? Interactive technology that would support the chef in this task. I think it should not be a screen on which data is represented and pictures and symbols and so on that the chef then has to look into and then switch back to their task in the kitchen. I think we can do better than that. And we are supported in this thought by a whole range of theories coming from philosophy and cognitive science and anthropology, sociology, feminist critical studies, and a range of other um, developments in a range of other disciplines. And I would like to summarize all these theories together as embodied theories. They're all theories that say, well, at the core, human beings are embodied. And this split between the mind and body that Descartes thought was the right way to see things is actually not the right way to see things. The split between mind and body is an illusion that we have created for ourselves. It's just the wrong way of looking at human beings. So my project, if you wish, is to see what can we do with these theories in interaction design. Can they help interaction designers create different kinds of interactive systems, and also make sense of interactive systems in a new way? One of my favorite philosophers within this group of theories is Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and he's written a book called The Phenomenology of Perception. I've been reading that for a long time. This is one of those books that if you read it for the first time, it's very difficult, it's very dense, you don't immediately understand what he's saying. I've had it beside my bed for years, and I would read every night, and then I would sort of use it as a meditation tool, because after 2 pages I would just simply fall asleep. But not because it was boring, but because it was sort of mesmerizing in a way. I didn't understand what it was, but I did have the feeling that what he was saying was really deep. It was something, and the only thing that triggered it in me was I want to understand what this guy is talking about. And then I started reading and reading and reading, and gradually I grew into it. And at some point, I opened up the same book on the same pages that I've been reading before, and I thought, yes, yes, I get it. This is exactly right. This guy is right. He's right on the mark. He's saying this is how it is, right? And that's when I got to see that this philosophy, what he's doing, which is called phenomenology, is not about making a clear-cut argument the way a physicist would describe or try to prove some kind of theory about atoms or something. But phenomenology is more a way of getting really precisely and detailed about the experience of things. And the only way to get it at some point is to read it and to feel that it sort of at some point resonates with your experience. You recognize what you read rather than that you think, yeah, the argument is correct or something like that. Now, what Maurice Merleau-Ponty is saying, one of the things he's saying is that routines, so these what we call situated practices, he calls them habits. It's like an old-fashioned word for situated practice. And he says habits, they are ways of dealing with the world that are in some sense intelligent. They are not stupid. We don't act randomly when we are a chef in the kitchen. This is it's a highly difficult skill. So if you habitually grab stuff in the kitchen as a chef and throw it into the pan, he says it's knowledge. You are you're an expert. You are a skilled person. You know how to cook, right? But knowing how to cook does not mean you have cook knowledge in your head that you then have to transfer to your hands. It is knowledge in the hands. And here we get to the quote on the screen. So it's knowledge in the hands which is forthcoming only when bodily effort is made. It cannot be formulated in detachment from the effort, right? So the knowledge is sort of there at the moment you start cooking, but it's not already there stored in your brain as a program or something when you're not cooking. It's there at the moment, it's recreated at the moment you're interacting with the world. And he says to understand something, so to know cooking, right? To understand what you're doing, or to sort of to look at a meal and say, this is a good meal, or to look at it and say, there's something not right about it. to understand what is going on, is to experience the harmony between what we aim at and what is given, between the intention, so what you're intending to do, and the performance itself, the execution of the performance. It's like a harmony between the two. And most importantly for this slide, what he says is the body is our anchorage in a world. So the body is not the robot that executes the plan in your head. It anchors your being in the world. Well, all of this. So when I talk about this stuff, you might think this is vague, and so so that's what it is, right? It's you have to read and read this kind of stuff and gradually grow into it, and then you start to see it's just a completely different way of looking at reality. There's this one quote by Torrance which I liked. It's less focused on experience. It's less vague than merleau-ponty. It's more if you look into the world of psychology and cognitive science. Torrance says, for example, cognition emerges out of the lived embodied action of the organism within its world. So you have a living being, an animal, human being, an animal, and that animal is already interacting with the world, already active, and then what we call thinking emerges out of it. So it's not in front of it, but it's something that emerges out of action itself. And it's not a process that goes purely on inside of the agent. Thinking is not something that purely your brain does. It's a fully embodied activity of the complete agent. And it arises from adaptive sensory motor coupling to the world. And to give one example of what they mean with this sensory motor coupling, so sort of a connection between what you sense and what you do, your actions, your motor actions, sensory motor. There's a very nice example by Andy Clark. He talks about the outfielder in a baseball game who has to catch a fly ball. So if you get a really in the game, sometimes they try to hit a home run, right? But if you don't hit it right, there's a chance that the outfielder may catch the ball, and then of course you lose a point if you know the rules of baseball. So suppose there's this big hit and the ball goes all the way into the outfield, then the outfielder has to run and catch the ball. Now, what does the outfielder do? What does the brain of the outfielder do, for example, if you look at that? Then the traditional theory, the traditional cognitive theory would say, okay, so the mind of the outfielder inside his head or her head is looking at the ball and has to project where the ball will land and then has to decide how to move their body to end up exactly at the right spot where the ball will be low enough to catch, right? Now, if you ever try to catch a real fly ball, you know that calculating such a thing up front will make you lose the game because you will be too late. You don't have the time to first stop and think, where will this ball fall? And even your brain, if you do it unconsciously, will not have the time to calculate this fast enough. It's a very complex calculation, as anybody who's tried to design computers to operate guns to shoot planes out of the air, which is actually one of the first things that cognitive scientists started to do in the 1940s in the Second World War. They already found out, of course, you need to anticipate where the plane is going. You cannot shoot where the plane is right now. You have to shoot in front of the plane, and it's a very complex calculation. So you would think that brains do very complicated stuff. But Andy Clark showed that actually the outfielder doesn't need to think all that much in order to catch the ball. What the outfielder needs to do is to start running and then try to keep the ball at the same height in a certain level in his visual field. So the outfielder is running and keeps the ball steady. So the outfielder, by running, starts to create a coupling and a link between the actions that they're doing, the speed of running, and the position of the ball in the visual field. And if you keep that constant, so if it starts to drop, you run higher. If it starts to rise, you slow down, and you keep it constant in your visual field. And then you just you happen to just end up precisely where the ball is going to fall on the ground and you can just grab it. So that I think that's a nice example of what a sensory motor coupling is. And what it shows is that we don't have to do all this thinking in our heads. We solve the problem by moving in a certain way in the world, coupling to the world in action. Now, my question is, if you think about human beings more as those integrated systems that are both body and mind at the same time, not split, but one fully embodied systems. Can we design for that? So can we sort of open up this split between mind and body and look what's inside of that? What does interaction design look like if we design it here? Well, there is technology that is sort of embodied technology in the way that I look at it, avant la lettre, as you would say. And Merleau-Ponty, the French philosopher that I talked about, actually talks about this. He talks, for example, about the blind man's cane. So if you have a blind man, visually impaired person with a cane, you could say, well, this technology is an embodied technology in the sense that the whole cane becomes, as it were, incorporated, corpora, Latin for body, so it becomes embodied into the system of the blind man, such that the blind man is feeling the world with the tip of the cane. So what Merleau-Ponty says, the person, the blind person doesn't end sort of physically, doesn't end with the hand, and the rest of the world doesn't begin where the hand is touching the cane. The rest of the world, from the perspective and the experience of the person, begins at the tip of the cane, and the cane becomes part of the extended body of that blind person. So, in the words of Merleau-Ponty himself, he says, the blind man's stick has ceased to be an object for him, so it's not some thing outside of me that I'm looking at and thinking about. It's not outside of my mind. It's no longer perceived for itself. We don't actually see the stick. The stick is not there for us if we're a blind person using it. It became transparent, as the philosopher Martin Heidegger would call it. And you could say that the point of the stick has become an area of sensitivity, extending the scope and active radius of touch and providing a parallel to sight. Right? So it opens up a world for us to interact with. If I want to get used to a stick, Merleau-Ponty says, I try it by touching a few things with it, and eventually I have it well in hand. Right? So getting this stick to use is not something that you have to think about which button to press. Right? What is the on button? How do I operate this thing? How do I set this thing in motion? No, it's not like that. It's not a machine. You grab it, you try it out, and then you get a feel of it. It starts you at some point you have it well in hand, right? I can see what things are within reach and or out of reach of my stick. So also my perception of the world changes once I use this stick as a way of perceiving the world. Now, all these things we're going to talk more about in the rest of the course, but I think the blind man's stick is kind of a model for the kind of interactive technology that we could design if we want to design embodied technologies. And a person like Scott Klemmer, who's on the reading list, says, clearly the digital world can provide advantages, but to temper that, we argue that because there is so much benefit in the physical world, we should take great care before unreflectively replacing it. Right? So digital and interactive and computers are not always better at things. There's a value in things being tangible, physical, that you can have them well in hand. More precisely, from a design perspective, solutions that carefully integrate the physical and digital worlds, leaving the physical world alone to the extent possible, are likely to be more successful by admitting the improvisations of practice that the physical world offers. Right, so trying out the blind man's sticks so that you have it well in hand, you could see it as a little improvisation, right? Fiddling around with stuff until it works. And that is very difficult with digital systems to tinker, to try, to explore, to learn by doing, and so on. Right? And that's what Klemmer is emphasizing here. Now we have a whole lot of embodied technologies, or let's say technologies that are not traditionally screens. And so there is a lot of opportunity here to design those embodied technologies. But the point is that at this moment, I think that many designers lack this theoretical background. So what this course is about is to give you this theoretical frame of embodied theory that could help you use the modern forms of interactive, wearable, ubiquitous, virtual reality, smart objects, to use all that kind of modern stuff that we have and really design um, a different kind of interactive experience and value with it than just sort of copying again the old metaphors that we had when we were designing screen-based interactions. So if you're into anything that is to do with wearables, haptic interaction, tangible interaction, smart objects, smart spaces, Internet of Things, ubiquitous computing, ambient intelligence, VR, AR, robots, brain-computer interfaces, um, all of that, then this course could be relevant to you. Um, the other way around, if you like this course and you want to find out, so where can I make it in practice, you could do some searches on these terms to find out what kind of application fields would be most likely be connected to the theories discussed in this course. There's a lot of other stuff written about it, also papers on uh, the relation between phenomenology and embodied theories and interaction design. There's already some work on that. Some of that work is written by me, so you can look that up. And I'm going to put that also on the websites that are linked to this course, so you can read more if you want. So this is the end of part 3. And maybe it's time now for you to have a drink and a sandwich or walk outside for a little and fill your bodies again before we return to the final fourth part of the first lecture.